This video is brought to you by BTI Institute, a New Jersey leader in certification-based management training.
I'd like to welcome everyone to our first lean coffee of this program year. What you're going to have is Nitin and I will be presenting today. And so if you don't know us, well, I've been working with Agile teams for, I keep on saying 14, 15 years. So it's been a pretty long time. And right now, I need to say, because of where I work, that anything I say does not reflect the views or opinions of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve Board. And pretty much I've been working with Agile teams and helping them grow. And I've actually just started working with Kanban teams. So it's been a very interesting journey for me. So Nitin.
Hey, Bob, always good to see you and partner up. Hopefully I don't sound like I've got a cold. I've been working in the realm of agility since 2001. I didn't even realize it at that time, but I was working with a Kanban view and team. And in 2010, I got into Scrum with hyperproductive teams, played the role of a Scrum Master, product owner, and eventually got into coaching. Currently working in life sciences in New Jersey, and Bob and I have a lot of fun doing this. So good to have you.
Okay. Do you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
For the recording, I'm just going to show the title page, the Experience Lean Coffee for today's Agile discussion group session. And so what we have here is a Trello board, and Nitin, I'll let you describe it.
Sure. So this is a Kanban board. It's a visual representation of where things are in the present and where things might be in the future. If you read left to right, we've got a swim lane for instructions. And then as we move along, we're going to move to do or discuss. So as an example, Bob might move the admin, add people to the board, that very top card, to in progress, because that's what we've been doing. And we've got another thing that's also happening, which is the describe lean coffee. And it's a very simple click and drag, very easy tool. Oh, not letting you drag?
It's not letting me drag today.
Oh. All right. When I talk about dragging, some people might be thinking on cards, or car, sorry. But here it is, move some things over. And the great thing about this is there isn't any fixed agenda. There's some people who may have added a few topics out here under the to do or discuss. And this is the time we open it up for others as well. So, hey, if you're interested in a particular topic, you can just click to add a card and go ahead and just put something in there. If you have trouble, you can even put a topic in the chat and I'll gladly scribe it over. And after which we try to see if there are any common elements, we group them together, and then we start talking about these. Oh, Bob, you might need to be logged in. That's right. Just hide your password.
Here I thought I was all organized already before the meeting, so I apologize.
Yep, and when that happens, let's see if we get any other topics come about. So yeah, as you can see now, right at the bottom of the swim lane, there's a plus sign with add a card. And we can just get a few topics at hand or have people add them.
And so what this is an opportunity for everybody to add a card. Then we'll go through what we call a voting process, where everybody on the call will vote for the card that interests them the most.
how do we access the board? I mean, I've opened Trello. I see some older ones, but not for today. How do I get to today's board?
Oh, I thought I put the link in.
I was in the email. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
Not in the chat. So unless I put in the older one, I apologize. Let me check something.
No, I didn't check the chat. So here's a chat.
Let me put this in the chat. I'm gonna put in a link. Okay, gonna put in a URL right about now.
Okay, so
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
All right, so I don't see any new cards. Is anybody able to add them?
Oh yeah, I've just seen one more pop up.
I did too.
Now, if we were all in a room together, this is also a nice way to do a silent writing exercise. And people have some post-it notes, they scribble a few things. And then when we ask to debrief, they just get up on the wall and start posting these up there. And sometimes people are surprised that there might be some common elements. Oh, you were thinking about that as well? Oh, okay. Or something that, oh, I was thinking of that, but I didn't have it. So you get a nice, rich representation of what's going on in the room. Or in our case, it's all virtual right now.
Is there anything else anybody would like to talk about? Because right now we have some cards. We could maybe give people a few more minutes.
I'm sorry. How do you add a card?
When you're on the board at the bottom of the column, after you're logged in,
Right.
at the bottom of the column, you can click on Add Card, and then you'll just get a blank card where you could put your topic in.
I don't see that option.
Then in this section, there might be a login. You might need to log in.
I thought I did, but let me try it again. Thank you.
And if you still have technical errors or problems, you could also just put a topic in the chat and I'll be happy to describe it for you.
All right, so while people are adding cards, do you want to describe dot voting or how we vote using Trello?
Yeah, sure. So again, if we were physically present in a room, a facilitator like a Scrum Master would probably be giving out either some stickers or just have people use their writing instrument. Said, hey, everybody gets 5 dots as an example. And you can spread those dots on the cards after you read them and say, hey, this is what I'm interested in. And what we then start getting into is some sort of ranking. The card that has the most interest will just move up. And this is like ordering your backlog. And the one that isn't as appealing would naturally fall to the bottom. In Trello, when you click the card itself, so Bob, if you were to click one card as an example, somewhere on the right, in the bottom, you will see a vote option or the thumbs up sign. And if you click that, it just says, hey, okay, we've got 1 thumbs up over there. So we could try that next. You could just click on the cards and see what is of interest and take it from there.
And if you made a mistake, you can just click on the vote button again and it'll take the vote away. And we're going to go by the honor system. So maybe if you can just, what do you think? Maybe three votes?
Yeah, I think 3 is fine. There's actually a mathematical model based on how many dots should be allowed given the number of cards in the audience. But let's just give everybody 3. Pick your top 3 and see which is of interest to you.
And this is not fair. People are going to get to see my vote, but that's okay.
And Rich, if you want to put something in the chat, if you're having trouble, I'd be more than happy to scribe it for you.
Thank you, I will.
And now what I'm doing based on people's feedback is I'm just moving the cards based on the number of votes. Some tools will do this automatically for you. It'll move the ones with the most votes toward the top.
Okay, I'm just going to add another card.
Hey, Bob, I see the sort by function on the column. It doesn't work. There's an option there on the 3 dots, sort by most votes.
Hey, John, thanks. I guess
Yeah, I don't know if it
Trill,
ought to.
Trill improved itself. That's nice.
Oh, well, they were busy over the summer too.
Yeah, a lot more topics now, a lot more thumbs up.
So John just saved me some work here.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. So you want to get started? And as we're talking, if something comes to mind, there's nothing stopping you from adding a card. And so basically the first question that comes up here is what comes next? What comes next after Agile? And what I'm going to do, since it has the highest voting, is I'm going to put it to the top of the in progress column. And I'm going to mark everything done, the other admin type of things. So Nitin, do you want to take our first pass at that? What comes next after Agile?
Ooh, this is a tough one. I think of agility more as a mindset. You know, when you think about sports, and I've used this metaphor before, right? So you go, hey, Bob, what you doing this evening? And Bob says, hey, I'm watching the sports channel. And my next question might naturally be, well, which sport are you watching? And Bob would say, your turn, Bob. What would you say?
I'd say I'm watching skiing.
Skiing. Oh, okay. Well, that's into sportsmanship. So you got some rules of the game. You got to prep and practice and really work hard at your craft. And you got to enjoy what you're doing. There's competition, how you handle the outcome. So that's sportsmanship as I know it. And then the many flavors underneath it are the different sports. I think agility is quite like that. So I would dare say the question might be better suited what happens or what comes after something like Scrum or Kanban or some other flavors of agility. And I don't know. It's a great question. I personally really enjoy the transparency, the inspection and adaptation that all these flavors bring. And I'm a fan of Scrum for sure. What do you think, Bob? Is this more of a philosophical mindset that I'm blabbering? Or is there anything else we can talk?
It's definitely a philosophical mindset. And it's a very interesting question that we could probably spend the whole session on. And Nitin, are you also time boxing us?
Nope, not yet, but I
Okay.
will do so now.
All right. And so what, looking at it, like, when they wrote the manifesto in 2001, what I've been reading, what I've been hearing is, they said, well, it only talks about software development. And, people like Jeff Sutherland are saying, well, Agile could be used for everything. And so they went back to the people that wrote the original manifesto and said, can you change it? And they said, no, they're not going to change anything. So the Agile values and principles are going to pretty much stay the way they are. However, I've been in some meetings and discussions where if you look at the 4 values, individuals and interactions over process and tools, the 4 different values, the word over, I've been hearing people say, maybe they should replace the word over with and, because if you lean way too much on the left side, you could end up creating some dysfunction, like working software over comprehensive documentation. And sometimes people get totally carried away with that and they just don't do any documentation at all. And then what that does is it drives behaviors in the organization where there's no documentation. So all of a sudden they start putting a heavy emphasis on documentation. And so that's why, with people I've been talking about, and again, this is not anything official, but they're saying, maybe don't put so much weight on the left, kind of keep it a nice balance, maybe have it leaning a little bit to the left, but don't go way overboard. Because if you do, you'll end up with no documentation. You'll have all the dysfunction that comes with that. And so it's really just enough documentation. So those are the kinds of things I've been seeing and hearing as far as, trying to apply the Agile values and principles to the way, teams are working now. Does anybody in the community have any thoughts about that?
And you could unmute yourself if you'd like to talk or participate.
So did what Nitin and I mentioned, was that helpful? What does everybody think about that? Changing the word over to and, again, I'm not daring to say we should change the manifesto. I'm just changing how I look at it and how I share it with my teams.
So it's Larry. I actually like that a lot, that and this kind of thread triggered a not well-formed idea that maybe the next horizon is complexity and recognizing both and the dynamic balance, between the linear and nonlinear or agile and traditional approaches. And the fact that you can't, I don't care whether it's an agile plan or a waterfall plan, chaos happens. And how do we organizationally and systemically understand that and prepare ourselves to deliver value when things go to hell in a handbasket quickly?
That's a great comment. Really appreciate that. If I could supplement that with a diagram that I had come across many years ago, the Ralph Stacey diagram talks about, when things are either simple, complicated, complex, or anarchy. And depending on the organization and the culture,
I have a point I want to make.
You may or may not be able to really get the benefit of some of these agile flavors. And Kinefin as well. Yeah, and that too, Larry. So great comment there.
I think someone else had a comment.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes.
I was going to say that with Agile, so the leadership can see that we have more increments. So we have more releases and we add more value on every release. That basically we have more increments, more shippable products or services.
Oh, I think I'm hearing about some of the benefits or the use of timelines. And you could use timelines to your advantage to show a lot more work being churned out in shorter chunks.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thank you for that. So the alarm just went off. It might have been a little faint, but should we move on to the next topic?
Yes, whoever created this, is it okay to close it? And so what you can see is I'm taking the card, I'm moving it to done. And so now that brings us back to the board. And what I will do is I will resort it just in case more people voted. And so what the next card is, what is the difference between Kanban and Scrum? I could take a first pass if that's okay with you, Nitin.
Of course, your turn.
Sure. When you look at Agile, there's different frameworks that you can use to actually apply it, where basically the framework's designed so that a team can work with Lean, the Agile values and the Agile principles. And both Kanban and Scrum, fit that line. And what the way I would describe the difference is Scrum is a set of events that take place during your sprint, and that sprint could be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. And that's a defined set of events. It's a defined set of items that the team is committing to, and it's a defined value that ends up getting delivered to the business at the end of the sprint. And then based on feedback, the team would then work with the product owner, and the product owner would choose what goes into the next sprint. And basically that really emphasizes the whole idea around inspecting and adapting, which is part of the empirical process of Scrum. Where Kanban is more based on a pull system. And Nitin's a certified Kanban expert. So I'm just going to give it a very high level overview, where work is actually, you have a team where work is presented to them, and they basically choose what comes next based on the order, and then they work on it. And part of Kanban is the team defines the flow that they use, like as far as how a team works, like the things that they need to do to complete an item. And so it's really, there's no set predetermined time. You have an idea based on the cycle time that the team is able to complete items in the past. So if an item was to come in and the team cycle time was, say, maybe 2 weeks, you could assume they'd probably be done between maybe 1 and 3 weeks. It really depends on what the item is. Also, depending on if the size of the item is pretty much standard, where it's very common to the other items going through the flow. I've currently been working with a Kanban squad, and it's a definitely very different environment. And if I was to choose between the two, and I had a choice, I would choose Scrum because I like the predefined events. Kanban does have what they call a daily sync-up meeting. It also has a stakeholder review meeting, which usually takes place on a monthly basis. So there are some similarities, but it's really the way the team, volunteers for work. And where in Scrum, they would actually volunteer for the items in the backlog, where in Kanban, they would just actually pull the items as they become available. And so then, what do you have to say about that?
Well summarized, Bob. I'm reminded of the days I was at a startup around 2001, and 20 feet away, it was very hard to get some information out of a system admin. So when they put up a whiteboard just outside of the kitchen, I just went up and put some swim lanes there. I put our clients' names on one side, and the CEO of the startup would go in and get his coffee once in a while and look up there. And that would be very embarrassing for some people not to keep it up to date. So it was certainly something very visual, and sure enough, people got up and started putting check marks in. So Kanban comes from a signal card from Japan. Very simple, the visualization of workflow. Therein, you limit your work in progress. You have active management of the WIP, and certainly you do the inspect and adapt. It's just as disciplined, if not more, as Scrum. And Scrum has got the 3 roles, the 5 events, and 3 artifacts. And it does work in a cyclical way. So every few weeks, you have a definite checkpoint, and you see where you're at. Whereas Kanban is more of a flow-based approach, as we said. So a few things there. Metrics is another interesting thing. Throughput or count. It's very easy to get that out of Kanban. It's something people don't debate, such as velocity or your rolling average, and the interpretations or misinterpretations as well. Cumulative flow diagrams, which get into scatter plots and other things, cycle time, all good stuff. So we blabbered quite a bit here. Any other thoughts from our audience? Let's open up the floor.
Yes. So basically, a Scrum is time box.
Yes, Scrum definitely has a time box, no more than 4 weeks. And they want to keep it 4 weeks max because market conditions might change, you have competition, things might emerge. So let's get things in the hands of your customer or potential customer sooner for more feedback.
And what I've been seeing is most teams you choose either 2 or 3 weeks. But again, it's anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. Was there any other questions? I think I heard your alarm.
Yeah, we may have got something in the chat, and folks, if we missed you, don't worry, we'll still have an open forum.
Is it okay to close this item? All right, then there's 2 in progress. I guess there's people are trying to reach out to us for help. Please add me to the board if there's any link into the Zoom. I did not get a link. Is that person still having a problem?
No, I joined. I'm so sorry, I joined.
That's a great way to get our attention.
Because there was no chat window. I said, let me add a card. Because I sent email to Nick, but Nathan is busy, but that's fine. I finally got it. It was in spam that I found this email with the link. So I just put
I really appreciate the way to get our attention. That was really great. And then the next
because
person
there's
said,
no chat window here. I saw there's no chat. So I said, let me put here.
and so this next one is maybe, I don't know how I can help with this. They said they can't hear anything, so they won't hear me asking if you can hear me. So I'm, if it.
Yeah, you can remove this card also.
Okay, all right. All right, so now looking back at our to-do column, again, I'm going to sort it. Thank you, John, for showing me this. This makes it much easier. Okay, so the next card in the list, and again, we're doing this by the order of the votes. When multiple teams are working and need to agree on interfaces, when is the best time to get agreement between 2 or more teams, assuming 3-week sprints? So Nitin, you want to take a pass at that?
Oh, this is something very situational, but let me take a small step back and say, hey, if I were a Scrum Master with a team, I would actually get into some team agreements and norms to see how quickly we can reach consensus and just how we work together, right? And this is then just a planning exercise. Once we do have this, hey, we need to get an interface and put it in the backlog. One team should have ownership of this, overlooked with a product owner. Now, this seems to be getting into scale. So you might have a product owner getting or overlooking either both the teams, or there might be 2 product owners for both of them. Then it gets more interesting and colorful. If you have 2 different product owners, then they got to fight it out and figure out when and how quickly to make sure this is in the top of the backlog, right? If you just have 1 product owner, it's a little simpler. You're saying, hey, we need to just bubble this up and then see how do we interface this with others. And the sooner the better. That there is no right or wrong answer to this because you're getting into dependencies as well, right? And those dependencies can be tricky. So if you're a Scrum Master, just know it's a bit of an art and more facilitation. And if things, if we don't agree, then just visualize it as some sort of a blocker or an impediment, which might be getting into the next card. So those are just my ramblings. Bob, you go next.
Sure. What I found is if you use your PBR sessions, your product backlog refinement sessions, you would actually, hopefully the team would identify these cross-team dependencies, because the last thing you want to do is start a sprint and not have a plan for how the 2 teams are going to work together, because in essence, you're going to end up probably wasting the first 2 weeks of the sprint just trying to get coordination going on. Another thought might be is if you have the capability that, let's say team A needs one person on team B, maybe let that team B person work on team A during that sprint, because then all of a sudden, now all the work is being done by one team. So what, in essence, what that is called is a feature team. And that means all the communication is within the team. So that would solve a lot of communication and prioritization problems. But again, you need to be able to plan for that. And that's why the PBR is very important. And really, the best thing to do is don't bring it into the sprint until you have those agreements, because otherwise it's just going to be sitting there and a lot of people are going to be spending a lot of time. Does anyone in the audience have any thoughts on that as well? Have you experienced this?
Cross-team dependencies. Or do you work in an organization where there's always alignment and agreement? I don't know where you're working.
So it's Larry. And
I have a, go ahead. I will speak after you.
now I think Nitin just put in the chat what I was going to suggest, which is a Scrum of Scrums or RTE or STE sync of some sort is, a place where rather than try to play out that conflict in a large group, representatives from the groups or the leaders of the groups come together to work both the content and the process. And if you're in a safe structure, where there's a retrospective, if people notice that that was an issue, it just gets named. And then when the pressure is off for making that particular decision, the teams can step back to look at the process of their decision making. So Sanjay, I'm sorry, I might have interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also typed my question in the chat window. What happens if there are multiple teams is some teams don't care, they don't respond, and it becomes so difficult, and especially in case where some employees have been sitting there for 15, 20 years, they think, they are very secure and they don't care about you. So how do you resolve that? And this is from a practical perspective. Other teams are dependent and they just don't care. You don't want to sit and escalate, keep on escalating it, because then you come out as the bad person.
This is a good question. Again, it's a little situational based. I would firstly just ask what your role is, right? Are you Scrum Mastering or are you doing something else?
No, Scrum Mastering.
Right.
And you are the Scrum Master.
Right. And a lot of Scrum Mastering is simply to reflect. So as long as you have a mechanism to reflect, that's great. Thereafter, in service to the organization, you can bubble up things. And that's what Scrum does allow it. Now, somebody somewhere might give you an ear or wonder what is the value of this or what is the cost of delay. So these are just a few tips now, which may or may not work depending on the culture and the setup. If you can kind of quantify this for people, that might be a way of working, or just keep it delayed and bring it up again to different stakeholders. Because I bet you if there's some feature out there that needs to be released or in the hands of your customers, it's probably going to have some weight to it. And hey, if they're still not cooperating, maybe it isn't that valuable or isn't as dire, So I would say you can get into the creative realm and see, hey, oh my God, the team's going to collapse, or the feature's going to collapse, or customers are going to walk away and we're going to lose revenue. So you have to amplify the pain if you can, or see if there are other things to move on to. But again, these are just thoughts, nothing more.
And go ahead.
This is Mike Alla. So just a couple of things. I mean, one, and I think that the first comment was kind of more about people in roles and being there for a long. So, I mean, there's a piece there of like the organization in itself moving to agile and kind of that not really being somebody who's participating in that kind of direction and mindset. But yeah, and so that's just comment on that point. But then even where you do have teams that are working that way, I had an experience with that where I had like stuff coming in from another team, and it wasn't that they were intentionally trying to delay, the work just wasn't there. And in retrospect of looking at it, we probably needed to reorganize the work that we were working on because of the inputs that were coming from them, and working with what we did know at that point and kind of reshuffling some work around, not so much on value delivery, but just on, having enough information to move forward with the work that we were doing. So just two pieces there, just one from an organizational point and another just from the team and looking at the work that you're doing and what information you have at that point, right? One of the pieces of Agile should be that, you're not working on the assumptions you would in a waterfall project, but you're working more informed. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for those comments and that feedback. Love it.
And anything else? And this, before we close this card, I'd just like to add two things. My approach over the years has changed. Like if I need a skill on another team, I ask myself, why doesn't my team have that skill? And what I try to do is I try to have a person on my team pair with somebody on another team to gain that skill. So that way, next time I don't need to ask for that help, because the more your team becomes a feature team, the quicker it's going to be able to deliver. It really does matter. So if it's, those are to me what I would call quick wins, and that's referred to as a feature team. And then the other thing to think about when you're doing this is that each team needs to start at the same time and end at the same time. If you have different start sprint and end sprint dates, it's going to make it even more complicated to get this cross-team coordination. So is it okay to close this item?
I think so.
All right, next one. Nitin, you mentioned this about blocker, so we'll let you take this one first. Not sure if blocker is an Agile term, but if it is it the that's a double it, defined by the team, or is there a standard definition?
This is interesting. So the Scrum Guide uses the word impediment, right? And it's really something that's just holding you back and you just can't move ahead. Now, some people want to, be creative and use other terms. Blocker is also used, I don't think there's a standard definition per se, but it's really, hey, I cannot proceed on such and such, and here's the reason why. Or, hey, we as a team cannot proceed on such and such, and here's the reason why.
Well, wouldn't that be synonymous with an issue or a risk?
You'll have to elaborate on that. What do you mean, an issue?
Well, if, I track issues and risks throughout the life of my project, and an issue is something that not necessarily is impacting the critical path, but it's something that occurs during the course of the project that kind of stops things until you figure out who needs to address it or how we're going to fix it.
Oh, yeah. So I can break this down into two other ways. So in the world of agility, if it's work that's already in progress, you can kind of put a blocker or an impediment and just say, hey, it's blocked and here's the reason why. If there's work in the periphery you're looking at, from the background, and you want to kind of stop that work a little early, then you might get into your definition of ready. When is a piece of work ready to go? You've got a description, do you have like an acceptance criteria? You kind of know the level of effort through some metrics such as story points. Everybody's agreed on it and move on ahead. But I agree with you, things do happen and those issues could become blockers, and you cannot proceed. Do you use something called, when you say risk, I think a probability times impact as well. Is that kind of what you're doing, or was that more of a general risk terminology?
Probability versus impact, yes, as far as
Okay.
risks.
Let me give you a little tip here. This is where I got this from the PMI ACP certification. Probability and impacts are just pieces of metadata, if you think about it. So you could have what's called a risk-adjusted backlog. And it's a classic certification question as well. If you're capturing user stories or cards, and if you have the ability to capture these, or you could just do an export and dump it in Excel and put these metrics there, then you can sort on those numbers to see how that backlog looks like. So I'm going a little off tangent just to get a little creative on how to use that with risks. But yeah, that's what a blocker is. It's gonna just stop you from doing some stuff.
And to add to what everyone's been saying, when you do your daily Scrum meeting, it's not in the Scrum Guide any longer. It's, they talk about yesterday, today, and blockers. That's pretty much the standard format that people use. And to me, when a team member says that they have a blocker, I like the term impediment better, but I guess it's one of these things that people just got used to using blocker. And so what they do is they say, I have an impediment. And to me, that impediment could end up becoming a risk or an issue like was brought up. But the team might not know about it until somebody starts working on it. It's great if you know about it beforehand, but the team may discover it as they're developing their work. And then what you would do is you flag that item as a blocker and see if you can get help. See if the product owner could help. See if beyond the product owner could help. See if it's a blocker because of the infrastructure team, or is it? And then you can actually identify those risks and issues if you can't get it resolved in a timely manner.
Okay, thanks.
So Bob, it's Larry, if I could chime in or extend your,
sure.
You triggered for me is when they first show up. I think it's interesting about whether or not it is a symptom or a root cause. So in many cases, that impediment's the early warning shot across the bow. Something's getting in the way, and it's really maybe at its best the signal to investigate, to figure out what is causing that. Is it a one-time thing, or is it actually someone has really surfaced a much bigger issue that could have far greater implications than that one particular story or whatever that's blocked right now?
Yeah, that's
yes,
great, Larry.
I agree totally with that, Larry. And to me, sometimes they might bring a blocker saying, I can't get this software installed. Okay. And to me, that's a great team member, because they're willing to actually expose themselves and say, hey guys, I need help. And usually the team will just say, okay, I'll help you after this call. And so, a blocker could be something really easy that's slowing a person down that somebody else can help with immediately, or it could be a bigger, organizational impediment type of issue. So it's an interesting thing where they, how they scale from something really small and easy to something, that's somewhat challenging. Does anyone have any other comments?
Just a question about blockers and or impediments and retrospectives and bringing them forward. So just recently this come up where we're doing similar work. They're different projects that are happening, right? But the coming out of the retrospectives are, hey, you know what? This wound up being a longer lead time item. It actually did block this piece of work, getting that into the next similar thing. And is there a more formal practice or a best practice for kind of doing that, other than, capturing it maybe in your retrospectives, but actually sharing it out to other things and kind of recognizing similar work that might be impacted?
Yeah, great comment there, Mike. Retros are always great and good to identify and discuss these things as well. I don't know, maybe I should start calling them turtles. They just move, there's pieces of work that move really slow. He's like, hey, should we call it impediment or blocker? Well, no, I'm just going to call it a turtle.
And what the goal that you're getting out of your retrospective is basically you're bringing up an actionable item that could be brought up at your next PBR. And because your product owner might, what this does is it really helps your product owner understand, hey, I want this, but I have to do these 3 things first. And so they need to basically have that in the back of their mind when they're actually looking at the backlog and ordering it and bringing items into the sprint. So something they want to do in the next sprint, they might have to wait 2 or 3 because of what you just said. And that is, to me, is getting gold out of a retrospective, because that's the information that you don't get if you're not an agile team, because you're not inspecting what you did and adapting. It makes it so powerful. Was there anything else? So with that, I will put this to done. And so again, I'm following the ordered list. Weaponizing metrics. Do people resist metrics because they are afraid they will be used against them? And this is something that's very near and dear to me. I've been going through a process where my organization decided to measure the amount of items that the team volunteered for, and then measure the items that the team got done during a sprint. And unfortunately, again, I'm not saying that this is happening, but if a team is saying, okay, you only deliver 50% of what you commit to, a smart team will just say, okay, in the next sprint, we're going to commit to 50% less, right? Because we want to hit that 100% metric, that we planned and delivered 100% of things. So you have to be so careful when you use metrics, because you want to use metrics to help the team improve and not to compare a team to other teams. Like I've seen organizations that I've worked at in the past where, my team's velocity was 100, your team's 50. Oh, my team must be better because I'm 100. Guess what? That 50-point team, all of a sudden in the next sprint, they're going to be doing 150 points. They're just going to multiply their estimates by 3. So it's definitely things that you need to keep in mind as you're doing this. I find cycle time to be a great metric, because it's something that, it is what it is. It takes you this long for something to flow through your system. And so it's really hard to really change that, So, there's certain metrics that I think are helpful. Others, if they're used correctly, to me, velocity is great. But also plan to done is great if it's being looked at by the team, because they understand if they're over volunteering, they could use that to help them maybe volunteer for a little bit less. So Nitin, did you have any thoughts on that?
I was going to Google something on YouTube and look for a witch's cackling evil laughter over here when it came to metrics, because people are afraid. The spotlight's right on you. You can't really hide in a cycle of 1 to 4 weeks, right? And this does work. And people are seeing this in white papers and conferences, or maybe even within groups or teams within your own organization, right? So certainly we want to be a little careful and soften the blow where we can. But yeah, people do resist.
Any thoughts in the audience?
I think one of the challenges has been in the understanding of story points versus the old way of estimating by hours, where if when management is used to the previous way of bottoms up detailed estimates by hours, and then suddenly they are using you have this discussion using story points and 10 to 12 teams, and I think they begin to look at, okay, how can we get a sense of exactly what is the effort that is put in across teams, and what is the productivity difference across the teams. So that's always a challenge.
Agreed. And that's actually very common. People are just looking for some realm of familiarity, and they're familiar with a way of working. So when you get into this, and let's say you have one team doing this and you start comparing teams, which is actually a bit of a no-no, and they discourage that, and you don't want that because each team produces things differently. You know, story points have been a pain point for a lot of companies. We try to do some relative estimation exercises, but I also, and this is just in the creative realm, you may or may not try this if anybody's on a painful path. Just give them both models. This is what, you know, a t-shirt size is, and here's the guesstimate for story points, and here's the guesstimate for maybe hours, and see how it goes. Now, the challenge there is, and again, this is still a no-no, is people will start reverse engineering that. They need to know 1 point equals how many hours, and we just can't do that. You know? If you're working on a piece of functionality and the team says this is worth 3 points, and as they progress and they learn more and they become more efficient, what they're saying is it's still a 3-pointer, but I might do it in lesser time. But again, time is not the equivalent of a story point. And that's a shift in mindset. It can be very, very difficult.
And to what Nitin said, that I see that with teams first getting started, they immediately try to equate points to hours, and it's such a hard thing. You don't want to let the team fall into that trap because it's a hard habit to break.
So kind of to that point, if you've got your story points, right? And I'm going to oversimplify a little bit, but let's say you're doing like a set bit of work where you're always doing design, build, test, and deploy, right? Like, and based on there, you've got certain story points for certain types of code. If you're building a class, you're building whatever, right? And you've done something, just trying to oversimplify the story points. As the team goes through, then presumably velocity would increase, right? You'd be able to get more points through that sprint in the same amount of time. And that is how effectively you could be using that metric, right? So you're starting to build towards being more efficient within the team, learning within the team, and other processes that are running more efficiently to increase that velocity. Same time, 3 months, whatever the number of hours are there, but you're actually able to get more of the same story points, all things being equal. Is that right?
Yes, it is, because a great agile team will use the retrospective to look at what they did in the last sprint and say, hey, this slowed us down, let's get rid of it if they can. And in essence, that will help speed them up. And I've actually, Nitin and I did a presentation a few years ago based on Jeff Sutherland's high performance team patterns. He's got a great white paper on that. And that's what it's really all about, is helping the team get things out of the way and allowing them to work faster and not work any more time. It does work. It's amazing. So was there anybody have any more comments about that topic? And so I think, Nitin, we should probably move into a closing part right now, if that's okay with everybody, unless there's a pressing thing out there that you want to definitely want to talk about.
Yes, very quickly, we've used the board going left to right, and we didn't get to a few things, but that's okay. Those were kind of lower on our list, and that's similar to the backlog. We will have an open forum. You know, at 7, I'll stay on certainly for a few more minutes. Won't be recording, and we can still get to anything else that was pending. Bob, what do you have for our upcoming things or announcements? Let's go back.
Sure. All right, so this will conclude our formal Agile discussion group. And like Nitin said, I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll be on the phone until a quarter after.